and welcome to this edition of Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris. Thrilled that you guys are here with us today. And I'll tell you what, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. About 20 million animals crammed into a small, less than 5-acre area. How about animals that can fly at 100 miles an hour? How about animals that fly 60 miles in order to gather up their food, go back and forth between Mexico, and are just overall fascinating? Well, if you're interested in that, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. Fran Hutchins is our guest. We're going to be talking about the Bracken Cave in Texas, and we're talking about bats. And I think that's just going to be a blast. And by the way, if you want to stay after the podcast and listen to this week's field notes, it's going to be on gliding mammals. Bats are the only flying mammals, but there's a handful of mammals that can glide, and we're going to talk about those. So please stay tuned, listen in, meet Fran Hutchins, learn about some bats, and have some fun. I'm looking forward to it. Let's get rolling. Welcome to Naturally Scott today. I'm excited to have you guys here. We've got an interesting guest coming up, and I'm looking forward to him sharing some stories and some information. The gentleman you're looking at, his name is Fran Hutchins, and he is with the Bracken Cave Preserve. And I'm going to let him tell you about it, but I will tell you in advance that Justin, my son, and I had an opportunity to go down to San Antonio, Texas this past week and make 3 separate trips out to the Bracken Caves, 2 in the evening and 1 in the morning. And it was spectacular. And I'll be sharing some of that with you, and Fran will be sharing some of his stories. And we'll be talking about bats in general, which I got to admit are far more interesting than I thought they were. I was not familiar with Bracken Caves until recently. I hadn't put an awful lot of thought into bats, but some of the stuff that Fran shared and some of the research I've done since, pretty darn fascinating animals. And so I'm going to look forward to that. But Fran, why don't we fire it up? Tell us a little bit about what your job is. What is it that you do there?
Bracken Cave Preserve is owned and protected by Bat Conservation International. I've worked with Bat Conservation International for almost 20 years now, and we've been protecting Bracken Cave for almost 40 years, since 1992. And Bracken Cave is important because it's the home to the largest colony of bats in the world. It's a maternity roost for Mexican free-tailed bats. And they're right now, in the middle of the summer, we have about 15 to 20 million bats calling it home.
That is spectacular. And I'm going to read this because I took it off your website. But the mission statement of your group is to conserve the world's bats and their ecosystems to ensure a healthy planet. And so I've made some notes about some things, some of which I stole from your website, about how bats do ensure a healthy planet, or certainly move us along that line. And so we'll dive into that as we move forward. You mentioned 15 to 20 million bats, which is the largest colony of bats in the world. I believe you also have a statistic where it is the largest collection of mammals in a 5-acre area, just
That's
beating
correct.
out Hong Kong.
Right, yeah. So between Mexico City and Hong Kong, there's more than 20 million mammals in the city. So inside of 5 acres, we have around 20 million bats, which are mammals. So besides being the largest colony in the world, we're also the largest concentration of mammals in a very small space.
Well, Mexico City and Hong Kong are the 2 most densely populated cities in the world.
They're at least in the top 5. We'd have to Google it to be sure.
So you think they're denser than Cross Hill, South Carolina, which is where I am right now? You don't think it's Hong Kong, Mexico City?
At 5 o'clock in the afternoon,
Well, there you go. There you go. Now, having watched this explosion of bats 3 times in 2 days, I believe I have these numbers correct, Fran, but correct me if I'm wrong. It takes about 3 to 3.5 hours for the bats to leave the cave in the evening, right? And you call that a batnado?
Yes.
And then it's roughly half that time for the bats to return in the morning, and you have described that as raining bats.
Right. So yeah, I mean, when they're emerging from the cave, they're coming out at ground level, and we have a vortex in the sinkhole as they come out. So that's the batnado. And then in the mornings, they're coming back in from thousands of feet up because their foraging area is about 60 miles from the cave. So they leave and forage outside of the city, out where our farms and ranches are. And so when they're coming back in the morning, they're coming in from high altitude.
I understand, again, they fly upwards of 60 miles one way each night to
That's
reach
correct.
their okay, and they reach astronomical heights, don't they?
Right. The free-tailed bats will forage up to 10,000 feet in altitude.
You told me that, that's amazing. I mean, that is so you've got 20 million bats dispersing upwards of 60 miles away at 10,000 feet. And we're going to throw a picture up because Fran was nice enough to share it. But there are so many bats going out on this stream that it shows up on a Doppler. I mean, he was
Right.
showing Justin and I this when we were there. It's quite an amazing thing to see. And we're going to get into why bats are. Oh, and you know what else I learned since you and I met, Fran, is that Mexican free-tailed bats can hit up to 100 miles an hour in flight.
Right. So they're also the fastest animal, and because they're 98 to 100 miles an hour in powered flight. So if they can get up and move, they cover a lot of ground in a very short period of time.
Well, let's talk for a minute about predators then, because they provide quite a buffet for a large number of animals. And when I was there, we saw in the sky Swainson's hawks, red-tailed, red-shoulder, merlin, and peregrine. And you said, and I heard in the morning but didn't see, great horned owl, and you said there are also barred owls.
Right.
And then down on the ground, and tell us about how they collect at the mouth of the cave, but you've got skunks and raccoons and snakes. So
Yeah,
tell us.
we have rat snakes, western coach whips, and rattlesnakes are large 5-6 foot long snakes at the entrance to the cave, along with the raccoons and the skunks and the ringtails as well. And we'll even get coyote and gray fox will come in to the entrance to the cave to catch bats for dinner as well.
Now, they are predominantly picking off the young bats, right? That are still a little clumsy in flight and maybe knock each other to the ground, and they struggle to get off the ground. I mean, in that time, they're attacked and predated.
Yes. So yeah, they're they're easy prey when they're on the ground, and they're within inches of the ground. So even the snakes can rear up and grab them. And our rat snakes like to hang from the ceiling of the cave and grab them out of the air. So there's a lot going on in a very small space.
And that when hanging from the cave, that's close to the mouth of the cave that they're doing that, right?
Right.
Okay, so talk to us about the inside of the cave, which, as you explained it to me, give us some size and dimensions and stuff. But between the guano and the beetles, and the methane, it's a giant death trap.
Right. So the cave is about 650 feet long. It's about 124 feet wide at the floor and about 117 feet floor to ceiling. So you have two big cavernous rooms. It's not a large cave as caves go, but it's and the bats are roosting all over the walls and the ceiling. You're looking around 500 bats per square foot. So they're really packed in there pretty tight. They've been using this cave for thousands of years, so the guano has accumulated on the floor of the cave over thousands of years. So it's about 100 feet deep. Between the guano decomposing, it generates a lot of heat. All the urine and the guano that's down the floor, that's ammonia, acetone, lots of different methane, high CO2 levels. So the atmosphere in the cave, especially down near the floor of the cave, is really lethal for humans. We have to wear special breathing gear when we're in the cave.
And you also have to wear special suits because of largely because of the beetles.
Right. So we'll wear Tyvek suits, lots of rubber boots, lots of duct tape, because the domestic flesh-eating beetles are on the floor.
I'm sorry, say that again, please, say that again and say it slowly because people need to hear what's in there.
Right. So they're basically housekeeping. Domestic flesh-eating beetles. So when you look down at your feet, the floor is moving. The beetles are so thick on the floor of the cave, and they'll eat the bats and or the bat guano, whatever's on the floor of the cave. So I get lots going on inside the cave as well as on the outside of the cave. Temperatures inside the cave are 104 degrees. So it's like a giant incubator, which is why the bats like the cave. It's a maternity roost. So that's great for the female bats and their babies.
Now, I saw like a skunk go down into the mouth of the cave, and you had mentioned snakes do that as well. You had also said, I didn't get to see this, but you said you've seen hawks fly into the cave. How deep do they go? And do they I mean, how far do you go into the cave before you run into, flesh-eating beetles? A sentence I never thought I'd say in my life, by the way, but I mean, how long before it's deadly for a snake or a hawk or a raccoon or a skunk?
Right, so you gotta get in about 50 feet or so before you get which where the entrance to the cave is and the floor of the cave is about 80 feet down. We're kind of ground level, and then there's a slope, rocky slope down to the floor of the cave. So most of the animals will forage right near the entrance of the cave or the first 10 or 15 feet inside the cave. It smells really bad, but they can still forage right there safely.
Okay. Alright. And how long have the bats been there?
Our best guess is about 10,000 years. There was some uh, guano sampling done a number of years ago, and carbon dating of those lower layers came back. The carbon dating came back to around 8,500, 10,000.
Okay, and backing up a moment, do I remember that in addition to the flesh-eating beetle, which is a hard phrase to get out of your head, there were about 5 other types of beetles that are also down there working on the guano?
Right. So we actually have 6 different species of domestic flesh-eating beetles, and they range in the size. The largest ones, which are on the surface and right are about the size of your pinky fingernail, down to some the size of a pinhead. So there's different size beetles. There's darkling beetles, a lot of these carrion type beetles. And there's mites and fleas and pseudoscorpions. So there's a lot of those type of cave invertebrates that are living on the floor of the cave.
And do those invertebrates ever leave the cave, or is that it? They're born, live, and
Yeah,
die in there?
no, they're cave invertebrates. That's their environment. That's where all the food is. So that's what they call home.
Okay. Alright. So let's talk a little bit about, why bats are important, and I can throw out one thing, makes me look smart, but only because you taught it to me last week. But these 20 million bats that take off every night, and by the way, we need to talk about who counts those bats, because I think I'd be exhausted by 12 or 13 million, but that being the case, they eat 150 tons of insects nightly. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Yeah, over.
Which is
Yeah,
roughly the biomass of the bats as they leave the cave, right? They're
right.
roughly eating their body weight in insects?
Yes, every evening they're eating about their body weight in bugs, which is over 150 tons of insects. Most of those are crop pests, so that's why they're out foraging over our farms and ranches in the evening. And that's one of the reasons they're so important because they prevent a lot of crop damage. It's, natural pest control, so we're not spraying lots of pesticides on the crops to prevent this crop damage. And so that's one of the reasons they're important.
So they're welcome by the farmers then.
Yes, sir. I mean, just our cotton farmers alone are saving close to $1 million a year in crop damage that's prevented from the insects these bug bats are eating.
And what are the primary ones they eat? Isn't there a moth that's a favorite of theirs?
Right. Yeah. So we have our corn earworm, our cotton bollworm moth. So those are the primary agricultural pests. They eat a lot of flies and beetles. It's seasonal, just depending on what time of the year it is. Determines a little bit about what type of insects are out foraging. So, and the bats are feeding on those insects. They're feeding not just at the crop level, they're feeding depending on where the insects, because these insects are migrating as well. So they're feeding on these insect swarms anywhere from 5,000 feet to 10,000 feet in altitude. Just depends what's going on each evening.
And they are hunting and eating on the fly, is that right?
That's right.
Do they not land at all during the night?
Most of the time, not. Sometimes they'll rest. They will have a bridge roost or somewhere they'll roost while they're still out, digest their food a little bit, actually, and feed again on their way back. But for the most part, they're out flying all night long.
Okay, and where and how are they getting water?
They get most of their water from the bugs that they eat, because these are bigger moths. They're pretty juicy. But if they need extra water, they'll fly over small ponds, swimming pools, these calm bodies of water, and they just gulp water as they fly over the water source. So they
So they're
drink on
like
the
a
fly.
swallow. Yeah,
Right, they
like a
drink on the
swallow. Okay.
fly. Yeah, drink on the
Okay.
fly and feed on the fly.
Okay. And you mentioned migration. What over the course of the 12 months, are there periods where there are no bats and periods where there are 20 million? And how does the cave fill up?
Right. So the bats, since this is a maternity roost, the bats are here primarily from February to November. Over the last decade,
Oh, they're there a long time then.
yeah, I mean, they used to be more of a March to November, but over the last decade, our winters have got a lot warmer here in Texas. So the bats have migrated back to Texas earlier. We do now have about 100,000 or so that overwinter, so they don't leave. It's
Is
just
that relatively new?
it's new within the last 5, 6 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and that's part of the climate change, things are heating up and no reason to
Right.
leave? Okay.
It's warm enough and there's enough food for them to feed on during the winter months when it's warm. If it's over 45 degrees in the evenings, they'll be out foraging.
Okay. All right. Now, and so tell us now, I don't know why any of you would know, but Fran is what people used to call a spelunker. But as I have learned, he is a caver and not a spelunker. So tell us a little bit about now. Bracken Cave is not the only cave in the area that has these bats. Matter of fact, there's one I think on the adjoining property or right around the corner. So tell us a bit about the formation of these caves and how those function. And it's a pretty good sized depression.
Right.
You've got that concave bowl there with the entry in it. Tell us about that for people who would be fascinated by the cave side of the batting.
Well, the geology in the area this is what we call a karst geology, karst topography. So it's all limestone. And over a period of millions of years, between water flowing underground, like small underground streams, and fluctuations in the water table and water trickling down from the surface when it rains, these are solution caves. So the water dissolves away the limestone over time. And also you get changes in water table. So there's collapses in these caves. So they create these large cavernous spaces underground. And then in the case of Bracken, at some point thousands of years ago, when the ceiling collapsed, created the sinkhole, and that's what exposed the cave to the surface. And then the bats moved in. So we have most of the caves we actually have in the area are very small. They're big enough for one of us to sit in or stand up in, but they're not big and cavernous like Bracken, or we have Natural Bridge Caverns next door, which is a beautiful commercial cave that was formed the same way by these underground solutions and water flowing and not. So, and that's why this area the preserve is so important, because this is also recharge zone for our aquifer. So this is how the water gets into our aquifer, and that's our drinking waters. So that's another reason this 1,500-acre preserve is being protected as well.
Okay. All right. And I want to talk more about some of the benefits of bats. But before I do, let me just throw this out. I want to say thank you to a couple of groups that have been kind enough to publicize the Naturally Scott podcast. And I'm very grateful for that. Prairie Rapids Audubon Society in Iowa, where I'm speaking in January, but they were kind enough to put the podcast in the newsletter. And I'm really appreciative of that. And Trina Honer of the Chesapeake Forum in Maryland spread the word to her 2,750 members. So maybe some of those will be watching our podcast here, Fran, and learning about bats instead of birds or whatever else they might be learning about. So it's kind of cool. Now, I had never thought about this either, but bats are big time pollinators.
Right. And the reason bats are so important to us worldwide is the habitat that they have. So when we're looking at the roosting space, most of our bat species roost in trees. For example, Texas, we have 32 different species of bats. Over half of those actually roosted trees and tree cavities and little small nooks and cranny rock crevices and whatnot. So we need these forest spaces for the bats to roost in. So by protecting that habitat, and they need small water sources to drink from, and of course they need a diverse ecosystem, so they have the insects that they feed on. So all the other wildlife in that ecosystem in that habitat area will benefit as well, because there's bugs to eat, there's habitat to live in and forage for food, and there's water. So by protecting this type of habitat for bats, all the other animals and insects and whatnot that live in those areas will benefit as well. Like you mentioned, most bats that we know of eat insects. We also have our nectar bats or our pollinator bats. There's a number of species of those worldwide, and they get the nectar out of flowers, and that's their food source. So they're like the nighttime version of honeybees and butterflies. And then some of our other bats are fruit bats. Those are our very large bats that we'll see. They're roosting in trees and caves, but they're fruit bats, and they're important for seed dispersal. There's about 500 different species of plants worldwide that rely on bats to either pollinate them or for seed dispersal. And then we throw in some of our other species of bats that we have some carnivores. So we have bats that eat other bats, smaller bats or birds, mice. Then you've got our bullnose bats. They eat fish. So they have really long toenails and drag their toenails in the water and snatch up small fish. Bats eat all kinds of different things all over the world.
Wow. And if my numbers are right, bats are 50 million years old, and there's roughly
Right.
1,400 different species of bat.
Correct.
And size range, we've got the bumblebee bat, which is about 2 inches.
Right. They're small enough they can sleep on your thumb.
Well, and apparently this isn't the same thing for the giant golden crown flying fox bat, which has about a 6-foot wingspan.
Right. So think of a wiener dog with 6-foot wings, and that's your golden crown flying fox. That's a fruit bat.
I'm sorry, a wiener dog with 6-foot wings.
Just for perspective.
I was going to mention a turkey vulture or a black vulture because a lot of our audience are birders, but yeah, we can go with a wiener dog with wings.
We can go with wiener dog with 6-foot wings.
Okay, that's going to stick with me, by the way, the wiener dog with wings. I'm going to be telling people about that. Tell us a bit about the history. There was a time when the cave was used commercially for the guano.
Right. So one of the reasons it's been protected so well and by the Maubach family for years and years before Bat Conservation International bought it from them. But the Maubach family protected the cave. It was a natural resource to mine the guano and sell it as a fertilizer, and also it was used in gunpowder protection during the Civil War. For hundreds of years, the guano had been mined from the cave, and there's a lot of other what they call guano caves in the Texas area that were mined for guano as well. But again, they would go into the cave, bag up the guano, haul it out, and sell it and export it for fertilizer.
Now, in light of our earlier conversation about methane and flesh-eating beetles, it doesn't seem like that was a bright career choice to be heading down into those caves to mine that guano.
Well, they were conscious enough. One, it's a natural resource they want to protect. So they didn't want to go in there and disturb the bats. So they did this during the winter months when the bats had migrated away and the cave would empty out. So when the cave empties out of the bats, and caves breathe, so there's airflow inside and outside the cave depending on the weather outside and barometric pressure and all. So the cave would actually air out, still smelt, but it would air out, so the bad air, so to speak, wouldn't be there. So they would go into the caves during the winter months.
Okay. And when the bats migrate from your cave, where are they going?
They're heading all over northern and southern Mexico. So our colony of 15 to 20 million, so it's about 8 million female bats migrate to Texas, to Bracken Cave, and then they all have one baby bat each, which is called a pup in June. So those bats are coming from a lot of smaller colonies, and the smaller colony could be 50,000 that's living in a cave somewhere in Mexico or under a bridge somewhere. So they're spread out all over Mexico, and they migrate to these maternity roosts here in the hill country of Texas and to have their babies.
Okay. So for those of you that have been kind enough to watch our other videos, this will be the first podcast where we're going to try to insert some video into the podcast instead of just still photographs, because we got some great shots of these batnados, if you will, coming out at night. But Fran, talk to us about that, because you had said that you used an Olympic ring example, and there's vortexes going on inside the cave. And while there's not proof, there's a belief that there are multiple colonies, and those colonies collect and generally fly together. So talk to us about that. Explain what your thinking is there.
Right. So the emergence that we see, the cave is 650 feet long, and so the bats. We're not sure what the cue is for when the bats come out, but they're pretty consistent time wise. But they leave they drop off the ceiling in the back of the cave, and they're swirling. This vortex is happening inside the cave, and it moves from the back of the cave out to the entrance of the cave and then into the sinkhole. And once it's in the sinkhole, it's, they're still 80 feet below grade. So they have to spiral up to treetop level before they can stream away and get downrange to feed. So the vortex, when you're in the cave during the emergence, the bats are swirling around, and they basically, you can imagine the Olympic symbol, and you have these multiple vortexes that are feeding each other. And as they get closer to the entrance of the cave, they're sitting right there, and then they move out into the bottom of the sinkhole, and then they start spiraling upwards. And then once they get to treetop level, then we have this river of bats in the sky that you'll see. And then when they get a few thousand yards downrange, because this stream of bats is like schooling fish. There's safety in numbers, because that's when the hawks are coming in and diving into that stream of bats. And the idea is the bats get you, Scott, instead of me. When the hawks come in, and that's why there's safety in numbers. But when they get downrange, they start breaking off into smaller clusters of bats. And we think those are those roosting groups that have migrated from Mexico, where they're roosting, to Bracken. They're roosting together inside the cave and then going out to forage together. So one of the advantages of the vortex is if you got 50,000 in your group and you drop off the ceiling of the cave, the vortex allows everybody to drop off the ceiling of the cave and all be flying together. So you're all together when you get downrange and you're going to go forage for food.
And if you haven't had a chance to see it, or maybe hopefully we got the videos up, but it really is a river of bats that go out. For the birders among us, it's the river of raptors in Veracruz, just a much smaller version. But you are literally watching millions and millions of bats leave this cave, and it is a vortex. I mean, it is a swirling vortex, and it's magnificent to see. And the sun is setting behind it, and kind of translucent through the bats, and it is really a magical thing to see. Now, they head off generally in the same direction every evening. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, they're heading about southeast, which gets them out of town and out of the metropolitan area, out where the crops are.
Okay. And there are raptors literally waiting. I mean, predators are queued up to eat them. Ground predators, reptiles, mammals, and then your raptors in the sky. They have to run that gauntlet for 60 miles, or does it kind of break
No.
up a little bit?
Once they get downrange, and you'll see them, if you remember, we saw them kind of like stacking between
Yes.
flying and thermals. They start stacking at different elevations. So the raptors are getting them right close to the cave and a little bit downrange. So once they get a few thousand yards downrange and start getting up to over 1,000 feet in altitude, they're not really worrying too much about any other predators at that point.
Okay, and then how about the reverse when they're coming home in the morning? And why
Right.
is it that it takes less than half the time for them to get home than it does to get out?
Well, when they're coming back in, they're literally raining bats. So you've got these thousands of bats all raining in at the same time. It's a lot faster to get in that way than it is when they're spiraling out and they're streaming away.
Okay. And Justin and I, my son and I, were very fortunate that Fran had us as guests one morning, and we got there before dawn. And so you go up, and there'll be pictures that show the seating and stuff, but it was only the three of us. We were the only three people there. And we could hear a great horned owl in the background. We didn't hear any barred owls, but Fran said they're there. But then you start to hear, it's like a like a giant mosquito, except it's millions of giant mosquitoes. I mean, it's a pretty good size hum coming down. And as the sun starts to come up and you just get that pre-dawn light, all of a sudden you see these little black giant raindrops, almost like hail, except
Mhm.
it's black and it's a mammal instead of instead of ice. But they are firing down, and then they just come straight down and then launch themselves into the safety of the cave, having made it through the gauntlet of the owls or whoever else might be out there looking for them. So it's a pretty cool thing. And if you don't know, bats are the only mammal that can fly. So we have some gliding mammals that can, go from point A to point B as long as point B is below point A. I guess technically humans can glide for a little while, but our landings are awkward.
Yeah, it's the landing that gets you.
Yeah, but there are animals that can successfully glide and then live through it. But bats are the only flying, are the only animal that can gain altitude in their efforts. So that's kind of cool. Fran, tell us about. I mean, the cave is great and the bats are great,
Mhm,
but you've got 1,500 other acres that you're managing. Tell me about the titmice research you're doing and the wild
mhm.
boars that are out there and the deer and what else is happening on that fantastic piece of property.
Right. So we have 1,500 acres of your Texas Hill Country. It's a oak, juniper woodlands, and a savanna mix. So we have one of the other reasons we're protecting this land is also it's a habitat for our endangered golden chick warblers, which are migratory. So these birds migrate from Central America to the Texas Hill Country to have their babies and back there, and they're here from March until June. So we're protecting that habitat for them. We have with the 1,500 acres, we have couple packs of coyotes, white-tailed deer, porcupines, ringtails, possum, raccoons, armadillos. We've got all the wildlife that the Texas Hill Country has here on the preserves. When we're managing that as well, we have hiking trails between hiking trails and bird surveys, and we use iNaturalist to BioBlitz to keep track of all plants and animals that are on the preserve. We have 200 plus volunteers that help Christy and I manage the preserve and take care of it. So that keeps us busy, but it's just a beautiful piece of land that Bat Conservation International has and is protecting here in the Hill Country.
And you also have a relationship with the Nature Conservancy and some additional land?
Right. So Nature Conservancy has another 2,000 acres that butts up against our preserve. So we between 1992, Bat Conservation International started protecting the land in this area. We started with just 5 acres, which is barely the footprint of the cave. And since then, between the Nature Conservancy, Bat Conservation International, and the city of San Antonio and its residents, we've managed to protect over 6,000 acres of continuous land from the cave south, northeast, northwest away from the cave. So this continuous green space that is habitat for golden cheek warblers and all the other hill country wildlife. So, and that's what's really nice. It's continuous. So you've got a lot of land for these animals to forage and move around on. So we're really proud of the work that everybody's done in this area to protect this amount of habitat, especially in the city where the San Antonio area is one of the top 5 growing areas in the country right now.
Is it
So
really?
it's really nice to have this kind of space. Yes. So we have lots of development, lots of people moving to the hill country. So we're really proud to be able to protect this space.
That's great. Now you also have you mentioned a couple hundred wild boars out there on the
Right.
property?
We have our headaches as well. So yeah, we've got feral hogs in the area as well. So we're managing them and other invasive plant species as well, and fire ants. And so that's trying to be good stewards and manage all those invasive species as well.
Now I met a young woman when I was there and she was doing some research on snakes and had set out some boards, some collection
Mhm.
boards and stuff and then you showed me some spots where you were collecting information on black-crested titmice.
Right. So
So this
yes, we're working with a number of the local universities between Trinity University, Texas State, UT San Antonio. So a number of the local universities, we work with the students and professors at those universities for various research projects that don't have anything to do with bats. But since we have this land, so it's a great outdoor classroom for students. And so, for example, the Trinity University, we're working with them on a study on the black-crested titmouse, which is a native bird species of bird that is in the hill country year round. So we work with the students at Trinity University to study its nesting habits and territorial habits just to get a better understanding of what these birds need for habitat and foraging space as well. So our volunteers work with the students and to help make those research projects happen.
So you're a good community partner then, and everybody benefits by that collective of 6,000 acres. Okay. Anything else that you'd like to share with the audience while you have us about the acreage or caving or bats before we sign off for today?
Well, I think if they want to get more information, you can go to our website, batcon.org. We have live webcams both inside the cave and outside the cave. So for those that don't have can't come visit us this year, they can go to our website and look at our live webcams to watch a bat flight.
And we'll throw that up on the screen, by the way, so that people
Yeah,
have
so
access to
and
it.
so there's great information about there and how to come visit next summer as well. We have tours all summer long to come out watch these.
Yeah, tell the audience about that. How and when can people come visit? When do you start? When does it shut down?
Right, so our season for the tours starts mid-May and runs through mid-September, and that's when the days are the longest. Bats are coming out around 7:30 in the evening, and by the time we get into October, late September, October, sunset is at 7:30, so we can't see anything. But during the summer months, when the days are longer, we have tours both in the evenings and in the mornings to come watch a bat flight. So if you go to our website, there's information on how to book a tour and the calendar, what nights are available. Our season is sold out for this year and fixing to wind down, but once we get into January, the new calendar for the 2026 summer will be up, and you can get on there and book a night and come visit.
Now, you do morning tours, but not very many of them. Is that right?
Right, we don't. Yeah, we don't do as many mornings. It's tough. You were there. It's tough to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and
Yep.
to
But But let me
watch
make a
that
pitch for
flight.
that, by the way. The location is exactly the same, and the animals are exactly the same as far as the bats go,
Mhm.
but the experience is completely different. The experience of sitting there in the evening and it's full sun out and everything's cool and the sun starts to dip a little bit and then the bats explode in that batnado. That is well worth it. If that's the only thing you can do, that's fantastic. But seeing it in the morning when you've got it raining bats and it's dark and the sound is different and the lighting is different. It's if you get a chance to do both, it's a really special thing. And I hope you take that opportunity to do it. I felt blessed and Fran, thanks for making that happen for Justin and I because it was an experience, and that's why I wanted to share this with the audience because I've been to San Antonio before and didn't know about this. And I think it's magical. I was telling a friend about it this morning. I think it's a very much overused word, but it was amazing. I mean,
Right.
it was breathtaking. Now, I just have to ask you one more question because you do mention, about 7:25 or so is when the bats come out, and the volunteers gather behind the guests. There's what, maybe 60 guests,
Right.
something like that, and the volunteers are there, and they get pretty excited calling out the minute, at 7:21 or at 7:23 or whatever it is. They had a little pool going back there, everybody throwing in a 5 and seeing what time the bats come out 'cause they they seem pretty enthusiastic about the exact minute that they popped out. I was just wondering if, next time we could maybe get in on that pool a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're pretty proud of it. It's one of the few wildlife spectacles that is pretty within a few minutes of the same time every night. So that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it's and for the audience that have seen other podcasts, you've heard me mention Why We Love Birds, which is the book that's coming out. But I'm also working on another book called American Safari: Zoos Without Fences, and it is about these places you can go in this country if you go at the right time and to the right location. You're virtually guaranteed to see something. and it's all about raptors and the megafauna, the big mammals, marine and terrestrial, with a single exception, and that's Fran's bats. That will be a chapter in the book, which I'm really excited to write about. Fran, thank you so much, man. This has been great. I've learned more again in the last bit than I knew coming in. I'll throw the email up now. If you've got questions for me, send them. If you've got questions for Fran, send them to me and I'll forward them on to him. If you're watching this on YouTube and you get a chance to subscribe or throw down a comment or click like, it really does help. There's no commercials in this thing. We're just having fun, but we're trying to introduce as many people as possible to the wonders of nature and the things that maybe most of us haven't had a chance to learn about or see. And Fran and the bats in Bracken Cave are exactly that. So take advantage of that. Those of you that are regular viewers, you'll know that I do field notes after this. And Fran, that's a little 6 or 7 minute clip that I do following the podcast. I just pick something and look up some interesting facts and go off. And I can tell you right now that this field notes is going to be about the gliders, the 4 mammals that glide. They don't fly, but they purposely move by air. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that. And as I like to close out each one is with a sincere thank you, Fran, for your time last week and today, for the photos you sent me. And for the audience, I want to say the same thing I say every time, which is stay safe and stay curious. Have a great day. Hello and welcome to this edition of Field Notes. Following every full-length podcast, I get an opportunity to pick a subject, usually a bird, an animal, a park, although it can be a little bit different. We did James Bond a while back, but generally a bird, an animal, a park, and I get to talk about it for just a few minutes, share some fun facts with you, some things that I found intriguing, and I hope you do too. So if you are listening to this immediately following the Fran Hutchins podcast, which I hope you enjoyed, you learned a lot about bats. And one of the things that you learned is that they are the only flying mammal. And fly they can. And they can reach 10,000 feet. And they can fly at 100 miles an hour in powered flights, which puts them among the fastest flying animals in the entire world, which is pretty cool. But while we only have the one flying mammal, we have multiple gliding mammals. And we're going to talk about that. Now, gliding is not the same as flying. It's close, but gliding is a bit of a controlled descent. Whereas, let's say I fall off the roof of a house trying to clean the gutters. That's an uncontrolled descent. But mammals, some of them, a small handful, have controlled descent, and we're going to talk about that. One of those groups that has the gliding capability are flying squirrels, which we have here in North America, and they are also in Asia. Now, the flying that they do is normally to forage, right, to get from one tree to another, or to avoid predators that might be coming. So maybe they can escape an owl, for example, or a snake that has climbed up the tree and take off and go to another tree and go down lower. So that's pretty cool. They use a skin flap called a patagium, and flying squirrels can glide up to 300 feet. And again, in gliding, you're starting at point A and you're descending to point B. They cannot elevate as they fly, which is what is the definition of flying, but they can glide and they control direction and speed, and off they go. There are flying lemurs in Southeast Asia, and these are the champion gliders. They can go up to 650 feet, which is a pretty long deal, by the way. It's two football fields. So they can glide from point A to point B, 650 feet. Now, their membrane goes all the way from their neck down to their tail and between their fingers and toes. So they're fully outfitted to glide at maximum efficiency. You have sugar gliders, which are an Australian marsupial, and their gliding distance is about 150 feet max. And like the other gliders, they are gliding for food or for safety. And again, saving energy as they do that. They don't have to leap from branch to branch. They don't necessarily have to crawl down the tree, run across the ground, which exposes them to predators, and then back up another tree. They can just glide right down. So it's a pretty cool deal. And we have the feather tail glider. They can only glide for 25 meters. They are the smallest of all of the gliders. They weigh about the same as a $50. They can be found in eastern Australia, and their favorite habitat is eucalyptus trees. And then we have the scaly-tailed squirrel in Africa. This is the last of our mammal gliders. So the scaly-tailed squirrel can be found in Africa. It's related to the flying squirrels, but it's different and glides for all the same reasons that everybody else does. Now, what is fascinating to the people who study this is that all of these different gliding mammals develop their skills independently. It is not as if one of them developed the skill, and then they moved to Australia or Asia or Africa. They developed them independently, which scientists take as a proof of value. If all of these people spent their evolutionary energy in adjusting from pure climbing or crawling into being able to glide, there must be some value to it. And it does appear that there is. So it's kind of cool. And again, why do we glide? We glide for food, we glide for safety, we glide to escape, and it's an energy saver. And those are all really cool things. I hope you enjoyed this. If you watch the Fran Hutchins podcast, I hope you enjoy learning about the only flying mammal in the world. And if you stayed with me this long, you've now learned about the only gliding mammals in the world. Thank you so much for listening. Really do appreciate it. Hey, and if you get a moment and you could subscribe to our channel, maybe hit like or drop a comment, all those things help. We're trying to build a bigger audience, which attracts more guests, and share the information and the enjoyment of the outdoors with as many people as we possibly can. And as always, when you're out there, stay curious. Have a great day.